What is up, my ninjas? I'm Strident, and I am back with another G.I. Joe review. This time it's a 25th anniversary, esque figure. It's in that time period. We're looking at Lady Jaye version 8. This is actually from a gift set. It was a box set that had Snake Eyes, General Hawk, Flint, Shipwreck, and this Lady Jaye, all in their more screen accurate versions of their costumes. So they're essentially repaints and retools from the 25th anniversary days to make them more cartoon accurate. I'd been waiting to get this one. For a long time I'd seen her, people, on our various Joe pages, Jotographs, the G.I. Joe community, just various pages around the web. I'd seen this figure and I didn't know where she came from. So I did a lot of hunting and I found her on eBay. Actually, I think I bought her either the end of last year, like right after Christmas, or the beginning of this year. And I'm only now getting a chance to do the review. But, as you can see, that's version 6, 7, and 8 standing right next to each other. 6 being the green jumpsuit, and the rest going down in numerical order. I'm a big fan of Lady Jaye, which is another reason why I was pissed off at the way they handled her figure with Retaliation. Because, I have a number of Lady Jaye figures. I have a custom Lady Jaye that I'm not going to put in this because, I'm still working on it. But I used that body, the very same body that they actually used for Retaliation, to kind of make her have like a spy suit sort of deal, But, that was when I first started customizing, so I'm not going to show it. It's too embarrassing. But anyway, as far as the figure goes, the cool thing about this figure is, as you can see with the version 6, 7, and 8, little things got kind of taken away because they all use the same or similar parts, with version 8 being the most different one. Version 6 and 7, it's the same figure painted differently with a different head. Same articulation, same belt, the weapons being molded in the same places on her legs, and you're just seeing all the same things, just different colors. Whereas version 8, everything is richer colors. It looks more like what you saw in the cartoon, and that's what I wanted the whole time. Ever since I first saw the 25th anniversary figures, for some odd reason I think she was the first Lady Jaye I ever saw. And here you see 6 or 7 and 8, version 7 and 8 next to each other. You can see there's some very obvious differences that make it, it's worth noting, you know what I mean? And it's even worth picking this one over the other. I just mainly, I needed wrist articulation and I wanted a spear. I couldn't find a spear by itself. I was going to make some, but then I learned that this one existed, and I'm like, hey, if there's one that looks more cartoon accurate, then I'm in, They cut down on the extra, she doesn't have a pistol in her belt like the, version 7 has, which I don't mind. I always pictured her being more of a, gadgetry, and more of a, she relies on her spears the same way Green Arrow would rely on his arrows. So, yeah, less weaponry is good. The cool thing, though, is if I do decide to put a weapon in her hand, as you will see in a little bit, she holds it perfectly, because now she has wrist articulation, which the previous two did not have. And I know I had said it before, but it's an important piece to think about when comparing these figures, you know what I mean? I like the fact that when you're looking at 6 and version 6 and version 8, you can see that the jumpsuit version is harkening back to the very first Lady Jaye, which, if you think about G.I. Joe, a lot of the figures came out and were different from their cartoon counterparts. This one is straight up cartoon counterpart, and that's the beauty of it, Subtle changes, but they make all the difference when we're talking, the cartoon versus a toy line. Because a lot of times toy lines do specific things for various reasons, and it's not always what we necessarily would would have wanted, especially once you've become a fan of the cartoon. Like for me, I got into G.I. Joe first through the cartoon, and then I decided to I decided to start reading the comics to see what the big differences was, I'm sorry. And the big difference was the tone, and the tonal differences kind of reflect in the designs of a lot of the characters. When the stories were a little darker and a little bit more serious, then your characters had more realistic gear and they looked a little bit more tactical. Whereas the cartoon, you had brighter colors, you had less gear because they didn't want to show you all the guns and all the knives and all that shit that are used to really cause damage to people. And this reflects that time. I have a little setup with like my old school Joes, you know what I mean? And a lot of them, in my eyes, the old Joes, they fought harder because war was different. It was a little simpler, So the soldiers back then were a little bit more hardcore than the newer ones. The new ones are hardcore, but there's a lot of tech to hide behind. So they're hardcore and they're a little smarter than the old guys, you know what I'm saying? So this is cool because she kind of fits on the in-between. I'm going to show you in a little bit, some comparisons of her, next to Joes from various eras of, G.I. Joe and in my collection. And you'll see what I'm talking about. She kind of fits no matter where you decide to put her. Now, the wrist articulation helps with a character that throws spears or even would hold a staff of any sort, because you need for wrists to be able to, have her hands turn inward or outward to get that proper movement, those sways, you know what I mean? And here she's throwing spears. So I need her to be able to cock that arm back and pop one of those spears out. You know what I'm saying? Like, she has to be able to do that. Otherwise, some of the illusion of this character being fully realized is gone. Plus, we've watched her for years do this on the cartoons. So for us to only get this once and she's part of a boxed set, that's kind of, But luckily, there's so many avenues you can go through to find these figures. Like I said in my update, there's a place out here called Big Fun, and Big Fun sells G.I. Joes in little baggies as well as, mint on card. In the baggies, you get like 3 or 4 of them, and there's I've seen a lot of rare figures, like Wraith in his ghost mode. And it's cool that you can look for characters and find them that way. Some comic book stores, they specialize in older G.I. Joes and such. So, she's one of those figures where now that I know more, I know there are other ways to find her. You know what I'm saying? Or other ways to find characters like this. And if you guys are interested, you should look into those avenues because it is well worth it. Her poseability is perfect. It's just like most of the other G.I. Joes. It's actually more like what we're used to with G.I. Joe than what it was initially. Because initially, when you're looking at the previous versions, like I said, the lack of wrist articulation and the skinnier legs, it looks good when you're putting her next to certain guys because then her proportions are all smaller. But when you see her in action, the wrist articulation kind of does a lot, as you'll see in the next image. You have her jumping and you have her, with her arm cocked back, ready to stab someone with that spear or throw the spear at someone. And it just looks better, to be honest with you. It just looks better. I couldn't do these poses with, not completely, you could get the arm in the position. Her arms could be the way they are, but her hands weren't. So, Lady Jaye is one of those agile, nimble characters. She fights with spears. She should be freaking ridiculous with her martial arts. She should not be one of those characters who's all stiff and kind of reserved in her movements, And I think this figure allows for that full freedom of motion with this character. And it's the way it should have always been. And obviously Hasbro and those making the figures figured that out, and they said, we need to make her a little bit more playable, because playability is a big deal. You're playing with toy soldiers, essentially. They got to be able to do all these things that they're supposed to do. You know what I mean? It makes no sense when you're having them all stiff and they can't really move. You can't pose them. You can't have them hold their guns right. You gotta, be able to do that shit and make it work. And I think these little improvements allow for that a lot. And I know I'm repeating myself, but I've got to stress it because these are things when you see a lot of G.I. Joe reviews that you don't hear. It's like, you know, oh, the articulation's the same as all the other G.I. Joes. And that's not true in all cases, you know. And some people don't know how to pose them in a way that shows that they are utilizing that articulation. You know, I do, and I want to see that, and I know there's others out there who may want to see it. So I'm going to make sure that I go over that part because, you know, it's kind of necessary. They're action figures, articulated action figures. Now, when you think about Lady Jaye, you got to think about Flint, right? The two of them are like the couple. A lot of people think it's, you know, Snake Eyes and Scarlet. If you were reading the comics, some people think it's Scarlet and Duke, but realistically, the only relationship that didn't change in the comics didn't really change. I mean, things did happen to them later on, but they had always been a couple until some certain things happened. It's Flint and Lady Jaye. I always dug them because in the beginning their relationship was kind of, you know, it was like a work relationship that had the potential to go further, and Flint was kind of, you know, he'd flirt, but he'd always be kind of weird about her flirting back with him, like, oh shit, wow, she actually does, she's interested, what do I do, essentially, you know, like he was kind of all business, and then, you know, occasionally he'd be like, you know what, yeah, I'm gonna play. So you have to have versions of these characters that complement one another, you know. So my son and my wife found this Tiger Force Flint to kind of take the place of the old school Flint in my collection, because I for whatever reason have yet to find an old school Flint. I'm actually still searching for an old school Flint, you know, with the brown pants and the black shirt. And, you know, I was hoping Pursuit of Cobra would have given us the Flint that we saw in the case, the concept case, and as well the same Lady Jaye, which will be the next two I'll get, and probably be two of the last Joes that I'm interested in getting. But as you can see, these two, they're BDUs. What's underneath all their straps and their, you know, everything else, their belts, they complement each other. So they look really cool together, and it's still a throwback to the cartoon because we did see the Tiger Force in one of the cartoons. Sorry about that. It was my phone. My wife was calling. Anyway, they complement each other. Now, when we move forward, this newer Flint from Retaliation looks a lot like way futuristic. So even though her gear and her BDUs can match up, they still wear pretty much they're like cargo pants with, you know, boots and stuff, and he still got his on. Just the way that they're wearing it, the styles are a little different, but it's not uncommon to see, you know, that sort of thing. Although I know in modern military, the shirts are a little different, you know, but I still think it's close enough, you know, although he looks way futuristic. He almost doesn't even look military. He looks like a spy with some fancy armor, like Action Man or something, you know. But this is what I'm saying when I talk about like form and function, you know. If you had like a special operating like unit, like a kind of like Shadowhammer in my Joe verse, that suit that he's wearing would be perfect. That makes sense, you know. But, you know, for your G.I. Joes, you need different colors. You know what I mean? You need different types of gear because their situations are a little different. So, you know, putting them together, I mean, it's up to you. It's your universe. But just, you know, at first glance, you know, he looks future. She looks just basic, you know. She's got cool decals. They're very simple. It's the same decals that the other, version 7 has, which is pretty dope. It's very small but very clean. All the paint apps on this figure are really clean. There's other things that you'll notice too when I get to her face sculpt. I'll just save it for the face sculpt. But decals on both arms. Every paint detail is just well done. There's no slop on this figure, it's kind of strange, but it's dope because you don't want fucking, you know, slop on your figures. It just makes sense for them to actually try to make the figure work, you know, try to make the figure look good. Don't give us slop. Now, she has very subtle lipstick or lip coloring, probably not lipstick, whereas the version 7 was, her lips weren't colored at all. There was no color there. Version 6 had bright red lipstick, which is not necessarily, it's girly. It's a little too girly for someone so tough. She seems like the chick that she wouldn't necessarily be wearing lipstick in the field. But to each their own. Some people might like that sort of thing. I dig Lady Jaye, so I don't care which version they decide to go with. Sculpting on her shirt, you can see she's got a different shirt than the version 6 and 7. It's the same. How do I put it? Different sculpt, same shirt. They zipped it up or buttoned it up, as opposed to having that cleavage showing. Because in the show, they didn't over-sexify a lot of these characters, whereas in the comics and in the toys, they had to always do things to separate the girls from the guys. I prefer this. She's a little bit more tactical looking. Also, her belt is different. The boots. She has those 25th anniversary boots that you saw in a lot of the OG 13, which is pretty cool because, it's an old school Joe, and that's what they look like in the cartoon. No issues with the boots, except for that part where you see the hinge is green, which is not horrible. I mean, you could always just chalk it up to some green piece of her boot or something. It's not that bad, but they should have really went with brown plastic. That would have made more sense. But Hasbro, they do 50 things right, and then they have to do at least one thing wrong or cheap, But overall, it's something it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb all the time, So, all in all, she's just dope. I've said that a bunch of times. They did such a good job making her look like her cartoon counterpart and making her a functional, G.I. Joe figure. There's no hindrance anywhere with her, her gear, with her belt, with her, articulation. Nothing's hindered. Her head movement is perfect. Her arms can move in whatever direction you need them to move. Legs can move freely. It's just a well done figure. And the fact that she looks a little bit thicker, in my opinion, works because she's got to be kind of muscular or kind of strong to be running around fighting with freaking spears all the time, And I know maybe I might be the minority on this, but this is what I wanted in the freaking Retaliation. I wanted her to be more, this is my special thing. This is what I do. This is why they got me on the Joe team. As opposed to just making her a fucking jarhead like every other guy in the movie, besides the ninjas. And, she was always unique in that way. And it would have been cool if she wore the jumpsuit like this. She could have the armor underneath the jumpsuit or woven into the jumpsuit, and it still would have gotten the point across and she would have looked cool. Just as long as her freaking boobs aren't like completely hanging out. Because I always thought that wasn't necessarily the coolest thing about this character. I mean, I like boobs, don't get me wrong. My wife she's got some boobs. But, sometimes it doesn't fit. The form and the function have to work together. She's being shot at on the regular. Her boobs need to be tucked away safely, you know what I mean? And protected. You got to protect those things, because you will need them later on. Flint will want to examine the breasticles. Now, this is where I really got to get into the articulation of her wrists. When you chamber your gun, if you have no wrist articulation, it's going to look awkward because sometimes they sculpt the hand where the wrists are pointing inward, not necessarily, flat up against your chest, so that you could hold the gun pointing the right direction and just chamber it with the buttstock against your shoulder. She looks really, really good aiming whatever guns that you give her. Two-handed guns, dual fisting, regular or dual wielding, dual wielding, pistols. If she's holding a shotgun, it doesn't make a difference. The articulation that she's been given with the new wrists allow for her to properly chamber whatever gun she's using, especially rifles. It's one of those tweaks that's so subtle and so simple that, only if you give a shit about this stuff will it even stand out to you. For me, it always stood out to me that, the previous versions couldn't do that. And I'm talking like up until Valor versus Venom and shit, like you couldn't twist their wrists. So the fact that they gave you the articulation and they took it away when it came to I forgot which version that was. Maybe it was still Valor versus Venom, but it was like the version 5 where she had a jumpsuit, she had different red hair, and she looked kind of weird. I don't know. It's the only way I could describe it. She was wearing like a really ashy light green jumpsuit, and she had black gloves and black boots, but she didn't have a hat on. She couldn't twist her wrists. Then you had 6 and 7 where she still couldn't twist her wrists, and they gave her cool weapons that would involve using, both hands and, some type of wrist articulation. But anyway, long story short, here is version 6. You see how she holds the gun. It looks weird, She's not holding it near her face, and no matter what I do, I can't really get it closer because I can't twist her wrist. You see how her hand, the back hand closer to her body, is twisted kind of on an angle? That's how her hands were sculpted. So holding, any type of assault rifle, machine gun, whatever, it's difficult. It's not going to look right in her hands. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where I'm going to show it to you from another angle. It's one of those things where if you really like to get really, involved with your posing, then you're not going to want it to look like that. You're really not going to want your figure's arms or hands to be pointing in the wrong direction. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, the wrists just, it doesn't work for, anything that she has to support with both hands. So using spears, it's almost useless to have the spears on her back. She can't even look down the freaking barrel of the gun, which fucking blows. You would think they would at least allow for that much. You can't get her to do it. I mean, that's the best you can do, what I did right there. So, version 8 is just dope. She's just perfect when it comes to articulation. I really don't have any gripes with her. I've had a couple of my subscribers say that people like me are never pleased. I'm pleased with this, Like I've said in many a video beforehand, I've said that a lot of people, a lot of characters, or a lot of people just allow, they allow a company to make a product, and then everybody they just buy it. They just take it, no matter what. People complain about Capcom's constant, making these incremental steps before they jump to the big next number in a sequel. But then you all buy it. People made jokes about that just recently with, the Super and Ultra and Arcade Edition. People made jokes when the first Street Fighter 4 came out, and then everyone bought it. In my case, what I'm pointing out when something is not, when a disservice is done, and we need that disservice rectified so that we can continue to enjoy this thing that somehow we got, on board with. G.I. Joe is one of those things where I was on board with it from like day one. It's fucking articulated soldiers that have specialties that just run the gamut. Why would I not love that? Why would any boy not love that? And then we get it, and it's met with certain types of, varying qualities, and I don't like that. Here, we have a figure that, like I said, she looks good with a certain type of character. You can't have everybody all armored up with all their futuristic shit, but as long as their BDUs kind of show, and you've got varying degrees of web gear and armor, she fits. It doesn't matter if it's Resolute. As you can see, I've got my Resolute Flint standing next to her, and they look awesome together. I've got freaking the Pursuit of Cobra 30th anniversary Airtight. He looks good. Same thing with 30th anniversary Stalker and Tunnel Rat. And, they look good. All of them look good together. They look like a team, like a functioning team, which is good, Nothing, it doesn't matter, her weapons, nothing on her person is so old that you'd be like, yeah, that's the wrong era. No. It all depends on what weapons you put in her hand. She's got a Beretta in her hand. They use Berettas now. So she doesn't look out of place or old or anything like that. And to me, that works. That's the beauty of G.I. Joe, This is definitely a figure that I'm happy with. I love like loading them up and seeing how they look with this gear. Will this work? And, also there's, some weapons kind of restrict some articulation, so you want to make sure you give them the right weapons for the situation, which is pretty, true to, to life. That's the way it works. You don't bring a fucking flamethrower to a gunfight, because what if your tanks get shot? You're going to be screwed. So this is a win of a figure. I was able to find her loose, away from the boxed set, because I can never find the box set for a decent price. It's always a little overpriced in my opinion, but she's a win. If you see her, pick her up. I'm really happy with her. She's my default Lady Jaye. I play with her all the time when I do play with my Joes. I love taking pictures of her. As you can see, she's just got enough articulation to look really relaxed and really cool, and that's what you want. You want a badass female soldier, and that's who Lady Jaye is. So I'm Strident. This is my story, and I'm sticking to it. This has been my review of the Lady Jaye version 8, and I will catch you later. Peace outside.